My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran Neo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue Mahan's chapter 19. He speaks about hereditary benefits and evils, or challenges. So here in the last few classes we've been covering on birth, death, reincarnations, and so on. And today's class we will talk about a little bit of that, but more importantly, what is it that impacts us now, right? And we talked about karma in the sense that past life, future life, all those things. But that is one we've covered, and I think I've given you several, frameworks and models to understand birth, death, reincarnation. But today we are going to speak about what is it that is passed on from before our birth to us now, and what is it that we will pass on to the next generation. Can we call that karma, or can we call that, what should we be calling that? So in this chapter, Mahan clearly clarifies the position that what are the traits, that what are the qualities, what are the characteristics that it's passed on from our ancestors to us, and also what are the benefits that we get from that, and what are the challenges, or what are the limitations, or what are the kind of things that make our lives more challenging from our ancestral DNA. And knowing this is really important because um, we have inherited many things from our ancestral lineage, and there are things that we can change, and there are things that we cannot change. So the question then is that, what is it that is passed on nature that we have to live with it? And what is it that nurture, that we can actually nurture such that we can make changes to our quality of life and the quality of life of our future generation? So what we have inherited from our ancestry, our parents, our grandparents, and that lineage, what is it that we can pass on to the next generation? And this is what the evolutionary, growth and development. So in this, Mahan speaks about death, and he goes through step by step to recap. And he says that, there is none at all in this world who is conscious of his birth before his birth, or conscious after his death, that is, that he is dead. So that's the memory of birth and death. Most people don't have that. And we spoke about that. And the reason why this is the case is that we know that the body goes through these changes, but the memory and all these things are embedded in our consciousness or the spirit. And that neither is born nor dies. And that is why we don't experience this birth and death. And we covered this. So what Swamiji says, after that, life becomes broken and spread. Spread means, every particle that makes up our body, which we have assembled, will be spread back to nature itself. Many creatures and many things will consume it and become different bodies. And we know this, and we covered this in the last. So what is it that remains after death? So is there something within us, a part of us, that remains with all of us, and with that remains with after our death, our bodies completely disintegrated and becomes part of nature. What is it that our kind of personality, the human personality, that is left behind? And here Swamiji says that the fruit of his action alone remains, right? And it says that it remains with the people in this world and nowhere else. It is not carried to any heavens or, Indraloka or Vaikunda, all those things. So he says that no, the fruits of his action alone remains. So if that person has done good things, all the good deeds remain back, but it's there for people to experience it. For example, a philanthropic person, a billionaire, he's been very charitable, he's educated many people, and all those things. That what we call good karma is not carried through to Vaikunta. After the body is once he is passed on, that's it. But his actions of helping the poor, helping people study, leaving money in trust for others to benefit, all this will be benefited not by him in after death in Vaikunta, all those things, but by people that are living here and nowhere else. They would not be able to benefit. Others in the Vaikunta would not be able to benefit from his money and his wealth. Only people who are living here. So Swami says that in that context, we see that there is some very subtle element that is there. That is, we have benefited from our ancestors, and that could be because of good genetic make or good traits that they have left behind. But there are also things that they leave behind in our DNA, which is, genetic disorders. So, for example, if our ancestry somewhere or grandparents or parents have a tendency of getting diabetes, most likely that will be passed on to the children, or heart disease or cancer. So, in that same context, we see that when our ancestors were very spiritual or religious or was a Sufi, you see that that trait has a high probability of being passed on to the next generation, at least someone from the next generation. So here, Swamiji says, that is the best that you can ever achieve, that you would not be able to carry this to your next life because there is no such thing as next life. You see? So here he kind of says that, okay, what is it that remains and why this is the case? Now, sometimes people ask me, Guru, but if the saint and the sinner, nothing happens after that, then why do people want to live, in a ethical and moral way? Because, everybody is the same after that. And here it is, Swamiji speaks about. I think all of us, we appreciate our ancestors for, the good things that they have left. Some of them may have left wealth, some of them may have left education, some of them have left because they were very industrious and creative and, attuned to knowledge, and that is embedded in their DNA, and that's passed on to the next generation. So sometimes, I really appreciate my father and maybe ancestors for having very good analytical and mathematical skills. And he was very strong in mathematics. So that trait was passed on to me. And the affinity towards mathematics and analytical thinking was there. So to some extent, I have gratitude for my ancestors for inheriting some of those DNA, at least nurturing that kind of DNA that is passed on. But there's also traits of disease and disorders that are also embedded, which they have no control over, or maybe their lifestyle have contributed to it, and it's passed on generation after generation. So there is this positive and negative traits that are passed on, right? So here, Swamiji, that is the best that you can do. You will not be able to take it anywhere, nor anybody can take it anywhere other than the earth, right? So the question then is that Swamiji then goes on to explain there are three kinds of um, things actions that have an impact on the ancestry. So what is passed on, right? The first one is actually past actions of ancestors. As I mentioned to a discussion just now, that our ancestors play a key role. Here, our biological ancestors and also our social ancestors, right? So definitely all the trait of the mother and the father is embedded in the DNA of the child. So if the mother and the father live a spiritual, happy life, happy family life, you see that tends to be imprinted into the child, and through the DNA and so on. So that has an impact on the child's life. So, however, if the mother and father have a lot of turbulence and conflicts, within themselves, and among themselves, and the household is not in a in a very harmonious way, and that trait tends to be embedded to the child, particularly when the mother is carrying the child, in a womb. All those vibrations are then picked up by the child's DNA, and you see that there are times when the mother is going through a lot of mental or emotional turbulence, or abuse herself, in terms of, or get abused. We see that vibration is carried on to the child, and the child have insecurities. The mothers take on alcohol and other things, and smoke, that's also physiologically impacts the child. So we see that both the dynamics of mother and father, because they contribute their DNA to the formation of this new child, and they pass on their traits through this DNA to the child. So the child inherits. Again, I said that if it's very harmonious, spiritual, creative, positive, that's also embedded. The other aspect is, of course, that lineage, mother, father, grandfather, and that goes on. This is the biological lineage, right? And that has an impact on all of us. Uh, the other aspect is our social, interactions, community, people, because when we live in those communities, while there is there's a biological thing that our parents and ancestors have an impact on, we also have the community influences our mindsets, our values, right? So the mental DNA or the intellectual DNA is carried through the community. So if you are among a community and people who are positive, inspirational, spiritual, you see that our mental DNA will resonate, in that same vibration. But if we are among the community and people who drink and take alcohol and be in the pub and party and do all kinds of things, you see that is also carried through to the child, right? The same thing, fellow villagers, because villagers play a key role in setting how harmonious is that village. If that village is very harmonious, helping one another, supporting one another, helping the poor, helping the last, least, lone and lonely people, you see that those values are carried through to the children and people living there. Of course, if the villages, there's a lot of conflicts and fighting, and you see that carries on to the child. And we can all actually see this in the world today, in places where there's conflicts that are going on years after years after years. You see the mental state of the children born there is very different from countries where you have peace and stability and harmoniousness and helping one another and caringness. So we see that this action by our ancestors play a key role. The same thing with leaders who set the tone for development, kings, and so on. So the more harmonious, the more spiritual, it impacts our way of life, and that influences, our DNA. So our DNA is impacted by nature, which our ancestors, all the things that they do, and nurture as what the current situation and circumstances influences us and how we get influenced by it. So we see that the past action of ancestors are really important. It has an influence in all of us. The other aspect is somebody speaks about is the mental actions, good thoughts and good physical conditions. So there's a link between good thoughts and good physical condition, right? So if people nurture good thoughts, because the mind is very important for the health of the mind, and also health of the body. And both, if the mind is healthy and the body is healthy, our way of life also becomes better. Our quality of life improves, right? So we see that, when our parents, our grandparents, when they nurture good thoughts, when they nurture good values, when they nurture, the goodness in their way of life and how they interact with life and how there's gratitude and all those things, we see that that's passed on to the children. That's why the family values are so important, right? Because it nurtures a way of life that gives us, access to information, knowledge, values that shapes us. And that has an impact on the physical condition of our brain, or when our brain is healthy. When we nurture good thoughts, inspirational thoughts, our brain becomes more harmonious. And you can see that, when families that are meditating, you see that the neural pathway becomes deeper and longer. The gray matter in the brain increases, the health of the brain improves. When the health of the brain improves, the brain is able to harmonize and channel the various hormones when it's needed. And it keeps the body in a state of kind of harmony, because the brain plays a key role in channeling important hormones to keep the body in kind of a beautiful state or harmonious state. And when the body is healthy, we see that, our mind, our brain becomes healthy. When the brain becomes healthy, the mind becomes stronger. So there is a nice kind of feedback loop that supports one another. We call this the endogenous relationship between, nurturing good thoughts, health of the brain, quality of our lives, and we see that the quality of life, reinforces the mindset. So this is passed on from generation after generation through our ancestors. When our ancestors meditate, when our ancestors, nurture good thoughts, you see that the harmony within the family becomes good, and that's passed on to the child. So we see this. This is again why Swamiji always says that, be positive, be nurture good values, is because not only for our own lifestyle, but there's a change in the brain chemistry, there's a change in the blood chemistry, there's a change in our DNA, and that's passed on to the future generation. Physical action, this is also really important. The kind of jobs that we do, what has been done in this life, as we do things, as we, do our exercises, as we go to, as we conduct our day-to-day life in the most best way to keep our body healthy, our brain healthy, everything that we do from young onwards, it carries through in our youth, it carries through, as a householder, it carries through, community work, and it carries through as we age, and finally, when we are in that state of transition. So the physical actions play a key role too here, that what do we do? If we constantly sit down and laze around and don't use our body, our brain, we see that we will lose it. And that is why it is really important that as we age, we are continuously active. We are active in, making sure that we exercise, we go for a walk, making sure that we eat healthy, making sure that, we read the right things, watch the right things to nurture positive values, calmness and, harmoniousness in our mind, you know, interacting with people who are inspirational and inspiring others, attending various community and social functions, including participating in charitable, causes, helping the poor, helping the marginalized, the vulnerable communities. As we start doing this, we start, not only keeping our body healthy and our brain healthy, but the values that we get that reinforces. And eventually what we see is that, all challenges that we come across, we see that even though the challenges we have, when we go down to the ground and help other people, you realize that how lucky we are to have many things that nature's blessed us, which other people may not have. And in that context, when we become more appreciative of our lives, we see that we improve our quality of life, we improve the quality of the life of our children and the next generation. So it's that mindset that is really, important. So here Swamiji says that what's been passed on to us today is because of all the actions of our ancestors, right? And also the mental actions by them and the physical actions. In that same way, as we absorb these values, we see that, as mentioned, nature and nurture, there are some things that we cannot change, right? for example, if we are predisposed to a particular genetic disease, most likely it will, show up in our lives, you know. But we see that, the same thing, if there were baldness in my family history, most likely I will be bald. This is something I cannot change. Of course, I can do transplant and other things, but nevertheless, biologically, that's embedded in my DNA. The same way, if I inherit a quality where my hair will go gray very early, most likely that will be passed on, and there's not much I can do, but probably I can dye my hair. So there are things that I can do, to make that change. The same thing is skin of the color and all those things are on, and there are things that we can change and things that we cannot change. But having said this, there is things that we cannot change, but there are things that we can make the change. So, for example, ancestors may not have had education because of poverty and all range of things, and that impacts the mental capacity and capabilities of themselves and also the children. Right? But that can a switch can be made if we expose the children to education early on, and you see that intergenerational hindrance can be overcome by making that intervention to give the younger generation access to education. And you see that whole DNA now switches. And if you educate one person in a family that have got no education, the whole next generation will move up, provided this person, initiates that help and the change for others. So we have seen this across the globe in many families. I do a lot of work now, and even in my own family, my father was one of the first ones that actually had a good English education, Tamil education, and that made a big difference for the next generation, the nephews and the nieces and the next. So we see that there are things that we cannot change, but there are things that we can change, nurturing the things that we can create. In that same way, you see there are many people that are predisposed to depression and mental illness and so on. That's passed on. And you see that, if they don't do anything, they will get that onset of those, mental disorders and so on. But there's an intervention that they can put in place, that if they learn mindfulness, if they learn to look after themselves, if they become positive, you see that what was a scar that is in the ancestry could be flipped back into, mitigating those risks, and also, using that as a foundation for a better life. So we see that intervention is so important, that what is it that we do, that we nurture the mind, we nurture a strong body, a healthy body. So, for example, if there is somebody who's predisposed to diabetes and they know, okay, pretty much everybody in my family and ancestors have got diabetes, then what do? Well, I can use the awareness that I get, the mental knowledge that I get, to change my lifestyle. So stop consuming or reduce consumption of sugar, exercise, be very positive, have good sleep, because lack of sleep also disrupts the endocrinal system in our body that causes diabetes and so on. So we can make those lifestyle changes to mitigate the risk of diabetes. It doesn't mean that we will not get diabetes, but that we reduce the probability of getting diabetes. And if we did that, even if diabetes, we got it in the later stage of our lives, with a good lifestyle, we can still manage that disorder. In the same way, all other disorders, including mental health and others. So here, Swamiji actually makes it very clear that, that there are things that we can change, and there are things that, we cannot change, and the things that we cannot change, we learn to cope, we learn to understand, we learn to live with it in the best possible way, so that it doesn't become a hindrance to our quality of life. So here, Swamiji says that, look, we need to understand this so that, we are able to improve our quality of life, improve our mental health, improve our physical health, so that it's passed on, not only improving our quality of life, but passed on to the next generation. And where there are flaws in our DNA, the things that we can do to fix it so that the future generation is not burdened by this ancestral DNA impact. So this is what this great Mahan has been speaking about. He's been speaking about how do we live an inspirational life, an enlightened life, through the practice of meditation, mindfulness, the practice of the I God philosophy, to realize that we are all God in disguise, or God in many different forms. The forms may be very different, but the substance, the forces, the goodness is embedded in all of us. And if the mind focuses on that, you see that the goodness of our life now improves. Even though there maybe have been challenges in the past, our life will improve, and will set the tone for a better life for the next generation in our ancestral lineage. With that, Sandosham.